Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm so excited to welcome today Adam Braff, former partner at McKinsey, who is a consultant on data analytics. Today, we're doing something exciting. We haven't done this before. Umbrix has published a series of diagnostic guides. Perhaps you've seen one or two of them. We have one on supply chain diagnostic guide, sales operations diagnostic guide, one for talent management, one for organizational design, one for branding. And today, we're going to co-create one with Adam. He's put some thoughts together on what a data analytics diagnostic guide ought to look like. And after our conversation, we're going to go ahead and produce the whole thing so you can download it. And today we're going to talk through it. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will. It's great to be back.
So you've put some thoughts into it. Tell me what you've come up with. I think I see in front of me, we're talking through a structure for the categories and subcategories. Take it away.
If we're talking about a business analytics diagnostic, I think we have to put some terms into play here just so we understand what we're talking about. This is really the function that involves data and analyzing data to solve business problems in any kind of company or investment firm. I was thinking if there are any businesses that are too small to benefit from this, and I think there are some. I think if it's like a one person bakery or something, that they're not going to really need a data and analytics diagnostic. But anything that's got multiple people, it's got computers, it's got analytics going on, there is at least something going on where people are looking at trends in performance, trends in their financials, trying to understand what's happening, what's going to happen in the future. And this diagnostic is for those organizations. Of course, most of the people listening to this are either working at big companies or they consult to larger companies. So they'll be familiar with what we're talking about. And in those cases, there would be something like a VP of analytics inside of a company or a data science organization or something that is analytical. Artificial intelligence and digital are sometimes in the name, but it's something that's analytical there. And the goal of this diagnostic is to figure out how well that function is performing and how well aligned it is with the overall mission of the company and what you can do better.
Yeah. So the kind of paradigm for what this is designed for is, well, a smaller company should do some sort of analytics. We're primarily, at least base case, we're talking about a larger corporation that actually has a data analytics function, someone who is a VP or director or SVP or something of data and analytics. And just tell us sort of that, Fortune 500 company with that function, what's that look like? Who do they typically report to? Do they report to the head of strategy or someone else? And how big is that function?
So typically, the data science or analytics function is going to report either into the head of a business unit that was the first to have the idea of doing this, or to some function like the chief revenue officer or chief marketing officer if the types of analytics they're doing are revenue focused. Sometimes it springs out of strategy, like you pointed out, or out of the finance organization. It can really attach in any of those places. A lot of the ones that I've worked on, because they've been a little more revenue focused, a little more consumer focused, have ultimately gone up into the chief revenue officer, but that's not necessarily the case. Also, we should keep in mind financial services firms and investment management firms are also in scope here. And in those cases, there might be a centralized analytics team that's going to report up into some head of back office or some head of operations for that firm. So it can really go anywhere, but you'll sort of know it when you see it. Like if you are that person, or if you are thinking of starting this function, or if you're looking at this function, you'll probably know where it is.
All right. So just to preface is that for these other diagnostic guides, and you've followed the same kind of format, we have a set of scorecards for individual pieces of that area, typically 15 to 25 or so different scorecards. And within each one of them, some objective criteria ranging from nascent to optimized. So that just sets it up. And we group those 20 or so because we are consultants into several groupings, each with 4 or 5. And you've done the same thing with categories and subcategories. So with that preface, go ahead, Adam, walk us through how you're thinking about setting up these different aspects to look at.
Let me give you the top level categories first, just so you can count on your fingers and keep me honest here. So the top level categories are analytics strategy, data management, category called advanced analytics and AI. So put that together into one blob. Analytics talent, decision-making process, and tools and infrastructure. They're like Jeopardy categories. So for the first one, if you'll take analytics strategy
For 200, yeah.
for 200, so the three subcategories there would be strategic alignment, performance measurement, and future roadmap. So what are we talking about here? In this big category called analytics strategy, it's a little dry and abstract to start with this one, because you'd think you'd want to start with, like, what are the analyses that make the most money for this company? But you do want to make sure that everything that the company's doing in analytics is tied to some business objective. And so that's what this first subpart is about, a strategic alignment. You have to understand what the goals of the business are. Are they trying to grow the top line? Are they trying to prevent customers from leaving? Are they trying to manage risks? What are the problems they're trying to solve? And are there analytical resources arrayed against those problems in some way that feels proportional? Like, do you have the right number of nerds working on acquisition versus retention? Also within strategic alignment, is there a kind of a business owner, a stakeholder, somebody who's paying for this thing, who's a sponsor, and are they really feeling that ownership? Are you, is the analytics leader meeting with that person? Are there readouts? Is there some kind of engagement with that stakeholder and then the other stakeholders who have to be involved for this thing to be successful? And then finally, within this subcategory of strategic alignment, where are the analytics people located? Are they centrally located in some center of excellence, or are they distributed far and wide across all of the different functions of the business and business units that can benefit from it? There's no one right answer here, right? So if you're thinking of it as a maturity model to say, well, what does optimized look like? The answer is that these choices have been made sensibly with respect to this business. So to take the example of federation of analytics, if the business has extremely different kinds of sub-businesses inside of it, like, Berkshire Hathaway, you wouldn't want one center of analytics in Omaha, right, doing all the analytics for all these different disparate businesses for Berkshire Hathaway. But if you've got lots of different regions of a company that historically were run fairly separately, but they're selling the same products, and there are a lot of overlaps in the kinds of data and analytics they'll do, you would want something more centralized there so the learnings could be shared more. Mm-hmm. So that's the strategic alignment subcategory.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Performance measurement is also part of this analytics strategy question. And here, it's about what are the key performance indicators for the analytics function. You could have these people doing analyses all day long, but you want to be able to measure if they're doing it well. In some analytics teams, what they're doing is so closely mapped onto the businesses they're supporting that their KPIs can be kind of the same thing as the business's KPIs. So if there is a cross-sell team and a revenue team and a pricing team and a marketing ROI team, the analytics folks who support them can probably be measured with roughly those same KPIs. But in other cases, the analytics team has a life of its own, and it's got a set of objectives and projects it's working on, like a generative AI initiative or some kind of analytics training rollout. And you want to make sure that you're also measuring that group on whether those things are happening too. So thoughtfully selecting the KPIs of the analytics team and tracking those is important. You also want to make sure that you're benchmarking that number where possible to competitors. It's hard to do because the analytics team can be somewhat buried inside of a company. But if you count the number of people, for example, who are working on analytics for your company versus your competitors, you might get a sense of whether you are way off base. And then you want to understand why. Is it because you are severely underinvesting in analytics, which is possibly the case, or is there a reason? And then also within performance measurement is ROI. So the sense of understanding specific things you set out to do, like I am going to improve my customer targeting model to improve conversion on the website by 5%, and therefore it's going to be worth this much money. Are you actually tracking those things and reporting out the the total amount of impact that analytics has had on the business each year. So that's the analytics strategy part.
Okay,
Then,
so you're showing like if the analytics group had never existed versus what we actually did do, was it worth the investment in the analytics team to do it, and making your case to keep your funding or maybe even grow the team to measure the impact.
yeah, that's right. And, it can obviously be a little bit of a slippery slope here. There are analytical people distributed throughout the business, and they might have been able to do some version of this without the analytics folks. But if you have people stacking hands on a set of analytics initiatives and you've dedicated analytical resources toward building those models and answering those ad hoc questions and building those dashboards, then you should fairly be able to allocate ROI to that team. And of course, you want some margin of safety, like with any call this like an internal consulting team. With any consulting project, you'd want there to be like a 10x return. So there wouldn't be a lot of fighting on the margins about whether this team actually is pulling their weight. You would hope that they're really, shooting the lights out.
Yeah. Okay.
And then to round out the analytics strategy, you don't want it to just exist in a formless void, like at a point in time. You want there to be some sense of the future and a roadmap of where this thing is going. So even if you're not going to adhere doggedly to this roadmap, you want there to be a roadmap so you have at least a hypothesis of what the next 8 quarters look like for the analytics team. Is this the quarter when we're going to tackle net promoter score analysis and the drivers of customer satisfaction and the relationship between satisfaction and profit? Is this the quarter when we're going to implement ChatGPT with Code Interpreter? Is this the quarter when we're going to adopt a new data management tool? So having all these things mapped out over the next 8 quarters in the technology adoption plan, some sense of how you're going to be building the skills of the team over time through hiring and development, and some sense of where you're doing the most cutting edge innovation and research, that has to be written down somewhere so that you know where the puck is going, even, again, if you're going to revisit it and change strategies a little bit as the future goes on.
So it's okay to change your plan, but if you do not have a plan, that would be nascent category at the nascent level of maturity.
I put that nascent. Yeah, it's a little bit hard for us to justify a person being completely unplanned in this category, but maybe if it's like an improvisational theater troupe or something, and they like to fly by the seat of their pants. But yeah, everyone else should probably have something written down on what they want to do with analytics and how to get better over the next 8 quarters.
Okay, and I think that rounds out our first big category of analytic strategy.
Yes, sir. And on to data management. So within data management, we've got 4 subcategories: data warehousing, data sourcing and integration, data quality, and data governance. Data warehousing is what it sounds like. It's where is the data stored? Is it data lakes? Is it a data warehouse? This is in particular data to be used for analytical purposes. So this is not really about your operational data store, which is a separate category, perhaps for a different one of your friends' diagnostics. This is about where do we put the data that we're going to be using for analytics, ad hoc analytics and reporting. And it includes questions like, how is the data warehouse set up? Is it, a bunch of them strung together? Is this where the unstructured data goes? Is this where the structured data goes? What is the life cycle of data in that warehouse? And does it expire after some point in order to comply with privacy and other regulations? And is this thing scalable so that as the business grows and as we decide there are new categories of data we want to bring in, even at the same size business, will the data warehouse be able to accommodate that?
Okay, so let me see if I got it. There would be one massive data warehouse for the company for all the data. And are we saying here that there's a separate working kind of data warehouse for the analytics team that you would port stuff over to when you're doing your analytics on it? Or are you saying something different than I understood?
Yeah, no, it's in a simplified model. That's basically what's going on, is that big industrial strength businesses have some system that is like basically taking in customers, onboarding new customers, fulfilling orders, like running the actual function of the business. And there are extracts that come out of that thing into a place where people who want to look at the data, analyze it, understand it, that's what they're hitting. So they're not, the data scientists aren't pulling data directly out of the core systems of the business. Okay. That's basically what's going on. Yep.
Okay, got it. All right, data warehousing. All right, data sourcing and integration is next.
Yes. So a lot of the data for doing this analysis is internal to the business. It's going to be like if you want to understand how many customers you have and what the lifetime value of each customer is, you're going to be drawing on data that comes out of those operating systems into this warehouse. But you also might be sourcing data from outside, from third parties. For example, if your big questions are about market share, you're not really going to know what the answer is there if you just look at your own internal data. Or if your questions are around customer satisfaction, you have to make sure you're pulling in the data from customer satisfaction surveys, which might be yours or they might be some third party. So you have to be good at data sourcing. This is especially important for asset managers because they have to acquire data in order to make their investment analyses and investment decisions. Also within this category are the processes for automating that. So you don't want to just be hand loading data into this data warehouse. You don't want to have like somebody like shoveling coal into an engine. You want the machine to do what's called ETL, extract, transform, and load operations automatically. And then on the way out, another important category of how data is flowing through these pipes is business intelligence, which is to say dashboards. How do you make sure that information that is critical for running the business is being pushed out into interactive dashboards and alerts and visualizations that everyone in the business can see and use?
Okay, great.
On to data quality. So this is largely about making conscious decisions on how good the data has to be. Is this a caveat emptor thing, or are you stamping and certifying as the central data team, hey, these numbers are right and they're consistent across the entire business? I think we can agree that the more mature businesses here are going to have more guarantees around data quality. They'll have higher standards for accuracy and timeliness and completeness of data. And there will be a constant profiling of the data and monitoring to make sure that the data is actually meeting those standards, and a set of initiatives to improve that and to run down any problems and trace the root cause where the data is breaking. So that's the data quality function.
Okay.
And then finally, you've got a sort of broader category that wraps around data quality, which is data governance. And that is to say, how are we coordinating across the different parts of the business to make sure we're all using the same data definitions, that we have a council or some body we can appeal to if two different parts of the business are defining profit margin differently and it's annoying the CFO? Who are the stewards who are in charge of different data elements? And how are they appointed? And how do we make sure that they're well trained and that they're doing their jobs? And how are we governing data for regulatory purposes, for compliance purposes and audit? So data governance encompasses all of these things. And the more mature businesses have got a very robust data governance function.
Okay, so that finishes up data management. You walked me through data warehousing. That's kind of where we're temporarily storing the data sourcing and integration. Where do we get data and how do we automatically flow it in there? Data quality, making sure that the data is good, and data governance. How do we set rules around it?
Correct. Now
what is
I will
next?
take I will take a brief pause here to do an interlude. Let's have a little interlude, which is to say that a lot of businesses that are going to be analyzed and diagnosed this way are big and complex. So at some point, you can loop back and repeat analytics strategy and data management diagnostics for the different parts of the business. You're going to get different answers for different countries, different regions, different business units, different functions. In each of these cases, one of the things you're looking at is, how is data being used to answer the important questions for this region, for this business? So it's a little hard to plot on a diagnostic because it's so specific to each particular business and each part of it. But if you take the example of a subscription, consumer subscription business, the natural deep dives you'd be doing at this point would be around things like, well, customer acquisition and cross sell and retention and win back and customer satisfaction. So there would naturally be exploration of strategy and data as it applies to each of those questions, right? This is just to say, like, I'm not forgetting all of the important business value drivers that are out there, but this is happening on a sort of different level, right? This is a diagnostic that is meant to be broadly applicable across a very wide range of businesses and investors,
Right. We're not getting
individuals.
into like what analyses you should be doing. This is a bit more high level than that. And if it was a, industrial pump manufacturer, you'd be less excited about customer acquisition and maybe more about tolerances and failure rates and stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Exactly. Tons of operational analytics. In that case, it might be some, wholesaler purchases, analytics around revenue. But yes, there are going to be different types of analyses you're doing. So this is more of the how is the analytics function doing at solving whatever the problems are that are important for that business.
yeah, it's like the infrastructure of the function. Yeah.
Yes,
Uh,
you got it.
all right, cool. Interlude complete. Let's go on to advanced analytics and AI.
So here, this is worth calling out as its own kind of discipline within the analytics function because it's generally going to be centralized within a company. Like most companies that are not like digital natives and not born doing AI as their core business function, to the extent they have an advanced analytics function, it's going to be probably clustered together. And that's great. And that's as it should be. So they're going to be doing things like predictive modeling, building models to predict what is the next best product to offer here, which customers are most likely to churn, what is the likelihood of someone making it all the way through this flow. So developing those models and validating them and deploying them and maintaining them is a whole discipline of its own, and you want to diagnose how mature that function is. You're also going to have machine learning in many, but not all businesses. So you're going to have some function that is automatically kind of labeling and reviewing data and generating algorithms and basically producing outcomes that are not necessarily driven in a deterministic way by data scientists. It's just sort of like set up to run, right? In those cases, the diagnostic's going to be around, well, which algorithms are you using? How have you trained them up? How is the data prepared and processed? And how are we evaluating this model and making it better over time?
Okay.
And then finally, there's going to be a category around AI-driven decision making. This is both categorizing AI and the new thing as of the last year, which is generative AI. So how, if at all, is this company using artificial intelligence to do things like make those industrial heat pumps better or improve the efficiency of its operations, even if it's service operations in a call center? Is there a customer facing chatbot that's AI driven, and how is that experience and how is the engagement? And to what extent are we internally using AI for strategic insights and foresight? The demo that we did a few months ago on advanced data analysis, aka code interpreter, would fall under this third category. Are we using generative AI to broaden and accelerate our analyses that we do?
Okay. Good.
So the remaining three categories at the highest level of analytics, talent, decision-making process, and tools and infrastructure are the proverbial people, process, and technology, right? So this is where you get to the deeper level of nuts and bolts on how you make these things work. So we'll dive into analytics talent now.
Okay.
That's going to start with talent acquisition and retention. So are you finding the nerds that you need? Like, how are you recruiting them? Where are you going out to get them? Do you have, an entry level job category to bring them in? Are you, are you effectively developing them over time? Do you have retention programs? So how do you know what makes these people happy and sad? And are you building their skills over time? Are you deliberately rotating them across functions, if that's possible to do? Are you giving them a way to have a career path? And a big part of this also is performance evaluation and incentives. So how rigorous is your performance evaluation process? Are you interviewing the internal clients of these analytics people to understand how good they are, where they can improve in terms of their technical skills and their client hands and their communications and everything else? So that's talent acquisition and retention.
And next we have training and development.
Yeah, so training and development. So here I'm going to focus a little bit more on the core team training and development as opposed to the broad one. So understanding where there are skill gaps in the team, if it's around problem solving, if it's around synthesis, if it's around specific types of modeling and analytics. and then designing a curriculum that will fill those gaps with continuous learning. And then to the extent it's helpful, internal or external certifications and specializations that people can have so that there's some proof that they have gotten this training. But developing people over time is obviously very worthwhile compared to the cost of hiring more people from the outside who are going to be filling those gaps.
Okay. So yeah, this is a good kind of talent management aspect of the whole function. How is that doing? And then this last third piece of analytics talent you have is community engagement and collaboration. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, so some of this is about sharing the knowledge with the rest of the organization and building collaboration. A big part of this is those dashboards we talked about earlier. So if you've got a business intelligence initiative and you pushed out a bunch of dashboards, you want to make sure people know what they are, what the terms on them are, defined as, and how they can use these tools, and generally drive adoption and have them used consistently so that these things don't go to waste. You also have a broader community that you're engaging with, external partnerships and networks. Maybe you've got universities in your area and you've got a network, a kind of an ecosystem of vendors that you're developing products with and you're developing analytical capabilities with. And then finally, innovation and co-creation initiatives, hackathons, and other efforts to really spur people's imagination, like a science fair, where different people on the team are able to come up with their own ideas for analytics. It could be inside the analytics team or outside, but finding ways to deliberately push the envelope on innovation.
Okay, great. I love the wrap on talent management aspect, analytics talent.
Excellent. That's done. So then on to process, decision-making process. So a big part of this is having a let me give you the three buckets here: data-driven culture, analytical decision-making, and predictive decision-making. The data-driven culture, I think you would recognize any business you've been in as to whether it's more intuitively driven or more data-driven. And this is not to say that every single decision must be made and can be made using data. Often you're doing something that's novel and you have to use intuition, and these things are used together. But there is an aspect of being a data-driven culture that has things like controlled testing of experiments and generally just wanting to measure things and to kind of not take for granted that you know what every answer is and always using intuition. So here, it starts with tracking the demand for analytics use cases and how the team's being used. Like, I think of it as like an internal CRM system for how, requests coming in and the ad hoc analytics team tackling these things and making sure that the team is being utilized. Then you've got the, pushing this stuff out into the business. Is there cultural change happening? So are people sticking with the old metrics when the data governance people have said, no, we've agreed that we're going to use this new metric. Stop using the old metric. You're confusing the CEO, right? So cultural change management. And then finally, within culture, there's a piece around data accessibility and democratization. So are things well labeled, let's say, right? Is it possible for people in the business who want to use these dashboards and these data warehouses and these tools to get support for it, either self-service or from somebody who can help them? So that's the data-driven culture.
Okay. Let's talk about analytical decision-making. Next piece.
Okay, so analytical decision-making is going to start with analytical frameworks and tools. So a big one might be a customer lifetime value framework where you're looking at all of the different value drivers across the customer life cycle and having people kind of stack hands on that and agree that that's the framework that's being used, and a CLV calculation that we're going to use in all aspects of the business to make decisions. Then we've got decision-making process integration. So making sure that there are checks along the way before some recurring function happens in the business to make sure that analyses are involved. So for example, when I was working at a pay TV company, if we were raising prices every year, we made sure we held out a control group so that we could see what the effect was of the price increase on customer attrition. And that was a built-in check that we had inside of the process of changing prices there. And then finally, performance tracking and feedback. So we need to make sure that when individual decisions are made that are augmented by data, we put in a new model for our door-to-door sales team, right? and we compare it to the prior model, that we're tracking the results of each of these things individually so that we can roll them up later into the broader performance measurement of the overall function. So that's analytical decision making.
Yeah, so I guess part of this one, as well as the previous subcategory, data-driven culture, it's you probably want to do almost an inventory of the types of decisions that are getting made at the company and see which ones are based on data versus intuition. You don't want to just say, okay, where is their pull for data and only look at those, but you want to say, what are all the decision types that are being made? Where are we using data? Where are we not using data? Right? It's
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
built in there. Okay.
Exactly. And in some sense, you'd want to start even one level up from that, which is which parts of the business are functioning well and which ones are, like which of our KPIs are we succeeding on, right? And you would presumably dive deeper on the ones that aren't succeeding and discover that those are the data poor ones. But what you might discover actually is that there's some push and pull between these different metrics, and actually what looks like a customer retention problem is really a customer acquisition problem. And to your point, Will, it was the failure to analyze customers on the way in that caused us to acquire customers who were churning too much and leaving us. So it is fair game to do what you just said, which is to analyze how rigorously data is involved in all the decisions that are made, the important decisions that are made in the business.
All right.
Then finally, within decision-making process is predictive decision-making. So we've done the descriptive stuff and now we're doing the predictive stuff. So this is going to be things like, we're planning out our budgets for next year. How rigorous are the predictive analytics around that? Do we know all the forces at work that are going to cause customer numbers to go up or down? Do we understand the macroeconomic impacts and the weather? And is this all tied back into our operational and our financial budgets? And do we have data that we can use for operational decisions? So can we predict demand on a week-to-week or day-to-day basis? And finally, do we have the data that we need for risk assessment and management? So this is a big part of what an analytics team might do. And like a risk team within a financial services firm, we need to be able to manage a wide range of risks, different factors that'll drive performance, and so factors in the kind of the financial sense. And therefore, are we using analytics to the extent possible to manage that risk?
Okay. So predictive would be this big kind of strategic planning questions, what sales going to be or what are our competitors going to do. And then there's more operational real-time things and the risk assessment piece. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Like think of the first ones as like the average score that you're predicting to happen for kind of revenue for operations. But then the third one is what's the variability around that? So we're ready for anything.
Okay, great. And then we're in the last big category, tools and infrastructure.
Yeah, so the analytics team has to have good tools in order to do their jobs. And this has changed obviously over the last, 10, 20 years. I think I would have said 20 years ago, a lot of firms were just using Excel or they were just using SAS. And then over time, a lot of businesses have really been developing their own analytical software, and they're writing their own scripts in Python. So you've got a wide range of choices here. And so within tools and infrastructure, you've got analytics platforms, infrastructure scalability, and tool integration. The analytics platforms are really around making good choices on which platforms you're going to use. So the mature state isn't necessarily any particular named platform or that you have to do it all in the cloud, right? But there's a reason and a justification for the platforms that people use to analyze data and to visualize data. And that there's training and support for those things, and we're monitoring the performance of those platforms. So this could just be, it could be Excel on everyone's laptop, but odds are if it's anything that's happening at scale, you're going to have some more centralized layers of the infrastructure underneath that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Then we get to infrastructure scalability. So capacity planning and management. Do we have all the room in this data warehouse to do all of the analyses we want to do as it grows over time? And that would include cloud-based solutions. And then do we have disaster recovery and business continuity so that if disaster strikes, do we have a backup for this data warehouse? And then finally, tool integration. So all of these analyses are creating numbers and answers and graphs. And ideally, you want to be able to move them from one platform to another. So to take the investment firm example, you may have a central team that's doing analytics on alternative data sets that are, credit card data and clickstream data that are telling you something about the key performance indicators of the businesses that this buy side firm is covering. But then the people out in the business who are, to say, the portfolio managers and their analysts, they're using some other set of tools to build their own models of companies and understand, how to put on their orders. And that you have to be able to move the information from one thing to the other, right? So is that going to be automated, or is it going to be hand carried? The more mature business is going to have a way of integrating these things with APIs and making sure it fits the needs of all the different kinds of portfolio managers out there. And then finally, you need to have the ability to develop custom tools, whether that's people in the central analytics team or people out, distributed in the business. They have to be able to develop their own custom tools and solutions. It could be as simple as a custom dashboard, or it could be, some alert that goes off that tells them when they need to make a decision. But you want to have some flexibility built into that, consistent with all of the data governance and the constraints that you put around the system earlier.
Okay. So this is amazing. And for those of you listening to this, if you're listening to this episode, you can go to the show notes and download the Analytics Diagnostic Guide. We'll have it prepared and ready to go. So Adam, talk to me a bit about how someone might use the insights from this. So let's say you've gone through the checklist and you've done a diagnostic of your organization. How should someone think about prioritizing, designing their future state, figuring out what they want to invest in, upgrading or moving along the maturity process?
Well, it kind of takes you back up to the top of the page, which is about strategy. So once you do all this diagnostic, first of all, if you're doing this as a consultant and then you show it to your sponsor and you say, look, this is where you guys are on the maturity model, part of it is going to be intuitive to both you and your client, right? That okay, wow, we're actually pretty good in terms of, like, our data's in pretty good shape, but like we actually don't have the people that we need to go after it. Like, we have this sort of ad hoc group of people that have just been tagged like in an expansion draft that just got pulled into this analytics team, and that's weird and suboptimal. Like, so some of the answers might be kind of intuitive coming out of this, right? More likely, what's going to happen is, if it's a company of any size, you're going to want to take a clean sheet of paper and say, well, what are the bigger picture strategic choices that we need to make here? Like, are we actually a data-driven company, or is that really not what we are as a company? It's not that important to be spending a lot of time and effort on data and analytics relative to other things that we could be doing, like just blasting out new features or being really creative or doing something else. Odds are, I'm talking my book here, but odds are you'll realize that there's something that you want to do more with data and analytics, if only because people in the business, when you go around and talk to them and do the interviews that are necessary to complete the diagnostic that we just talked through, inevitably one of the questions in those interviews is going to be, hey, are there things that head of ops, head of marketing, that you want to know about your business that you don't know today, and that's keeping you from being able to do the best job possible? And like 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes, and they're going to tell you what those things are, right? So to the extent that you have collected a bunch of these more specific examples of demand in the business, that's going to give you a feeling for whether you want to be a more analytical firm or not, right? So where we were, like, before that little digression, was like, how do you go put this into practice? Well, if you then pick a point along the continuum of very kind of low maturity, kind of ad hoc intuitive on one end of an extreme, and super duper data driven and algorithmic on the other extreme, you're somewhere in the middle there, right? And you want to kind of edge probably more to the right? You want to try to get more toward the more sophisticated, right? Then there are going to be other strategic choices, like, do we want to keep this thing more centralized, or do we want it to be more distributed? And by this thing, I mean the analytics function, right? Do we want to be distinguished in our ability to harness our own data, or do we want to be more external facing and just be more aggressive in gobbling up external data, or vice versa, like monetizing our data by selling it to third parties, right? Do we want to be extremely buttoned down and very cautious in terms of reputational risk and how we're using data. Like if we don't want a single thing to be done without explicit customer consent, or do we want to be a little more freewheeling on that one, right? And it sounds like I'm sort of telling you the answer on that, but genuinely companies occupy different points along that continuum.
Yeah.
So a lot of different strategic choices. From that, what falls out is, okay, this is how aggressively we want to build these capabilities, right? We want to get better by next year, by 2 years out, by 3 years out. Odds are you're going to have something like 8 quarters or 12 quarters in which you want to gradually get better at these things, starting with some kind of quick wins on use cases that really matter, and building over time on the things that take a little more time to build out, like your like your marketing ROI models or something.
Yeah.
So that's the so you're kind of looping back to the strategy part, saying, okay, let's make the roadmap. Let's get aligned on our strategy. Let's make the roadmap. Let's plot out what we want to do in people, process, and technology and specific use cases over the next 8 quarters, and do that in a logical order.
What I like about what you've laid out here, it's somewhat meta, but the idea of the data analytics is you're making things visible instead of using your intuition. And this really detailed diagnostic that you've come up with would allow someone to take a complete holistic look at the function and say, oh, I guess there are some areas where we could invest, and it just helps make it visible, right? As opposed to intuition.
Yeah, exactly. Like any framework, like the millions of frameworks that you've helpfully kind of deployed, like it's a check for completeness. And there may be things on this list that escape your notice as you're building out this analytics function. Like you're super duper focused on AI and having making the choice between ChatGPT and Claude or something. And what you've forgotten is, oh wait, we forgot to build a data-driven culture. Like no one in the business is adopting any of this because they don't care, right? Or we forgot to measure how much lift this initiative is having. Or we forgot to make sure that the data that we need to feed into that beast is actually being stacked up somewhere and ready to go, and it's high quality, right?
Yeah.
So that's really the goal of this diagnostic, is like you really want to cover off all these different dimensions and in order to have a complete solution.
Now, I have a question that someone might raise about this is you don't really talk in here about data security. And is that because that would be really, you think of that as a separate function in the business, more of the, information security officer? Talk to me about that piece a bit.
Yeah, I didn't want to get too deep into the kind of the fractal layers of detail around InfoSec and kind of data security. I mean, it's kind of tucked in here under data governance and kind of, compliance and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, you definitely have to worry about that. I want to distinguish also between the business analytics function and the IT function, right? The chief information officer. It's generally quite rare. When you were asking me where this function attaches, it doesn't usually report up into IT. In some sense, IT is like the business partner who's enabling these things. So all of the stuff around the category of data management and tools and infrastructure are like the requirements that this team would set out that some IT team would then go implement on their behalf. So inside of that IT team is going to be a CISO who's in charge of information security as well. But yeah, this is more of the, what does the business really need and how do they know the language of what to ask for so they can do their job better.
Excellent. Now, Adam, for listeners that want to find out more about your practice, where would you like to point them online?
They should go to braff.co. That's BRAFF.co. And there they will find a whole bunch of other tools and resources. There's a blog that's about food and analytics. There is a forecasting contest, which I think by the time this drops, it'll probably be underway.
It will be underway.
But there's an annual forecasting contest. There is just a whole bunch of stuff to go look at. And there is a program.
You have a course, right? Let's bring that one up. Mention that.
Yeah, the analytics intensive is what I was about to say. So there is a course that I teach. So I teach this content in graduate programs at Brown and NYU. And by popular demand, I've begun teaching a corporate version of that exact same material. And I do that in something called the Analytics Intensive. So you can find that on the website as well.
Okay. We will include those links. And we'll also include the link to download the Analytics Diagnostic Guide in the show notes as well. Adam, thank you for putting this together. This is incredible. And I really appreciate you sharing this with us.
Well, thanks for the time. I appreciate your curiosity about this, and it's stuff that I love to do. So I hope everyone else gets a kick out of doing it too.